In the quest to understand the origins of humanity's capacity for evil, The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo provides an in-depth exploration of the darker side of human nature. This book summary reveals how situational factors, rather than inherent traits, can lead ordinary people to commit horrific acts. Through a deep dive into psychological experiments, historical events, and real-life atrocities, Zimbardo unveils the thin line between good and evil that we all walk daily. The critical message is that our environment and the circumstances we face play a significant role in determining whether we fall into heroism or monstrosity. The Lucifer Effect Summary. The title of the book is derived from the biblical story of Lucifer, an angel who fell from grace and became Satan, the embodiment of evil. This transformation serves as a powerful metaphor for the potential within each of us to turn from good to evil under the right or wrong circumstances. Just as Lucifer's fall was a result of challenging divine authority, humans too can fall prey to evil by succumbing to external pressures, influences, and situational factors. The Lucifer effect is not confined to religious or mythological narratives. It's a reality that unfolds in everyday life, often in the most unexpected places. From war zones to peaceful communities, seemingly ordinary individuals can be driven to commit acts of cruelty and violence. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, nor does it occur in isolation. It's the result of a complex interplay between individual psychology and the environment in which a person finds themselves. Chapter 1: The Universal Capacity for Evil. One of the central tenets of Zimbardo's work is the idea that anyone can become a perpetrator of evil given the right conditions. This challenges the common belief that only inherently evil people commit atrocious acts. Instead, Zimbardo argues that we all have the potential for evil within us, which can be triggered by specific situational factors. To illustrate this, Zimbardo presents the case of Ivan Chip Frederick, a former staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, who was stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Before his deployment, Frederick was an ordinary, upstanding citizen with no history of violence or sadistic tendencies. However, under the extreme conditions of the prison environment, he became involved in the abuse and torture of prisoners. This drastic change in behavior wasn't due to a sudden revelation of an evil nature, but was instead the result of the dehumanizing and morally corrosive environment of the prison. Frederick's story is a stark reminder that the line between good and evil is not fixed. It's a permeable boundary that can shift based on external pressures, authority figures, and the social context. This understanding forces us to reconsider the way we judge others who commit heinous acts. Rather than attributing their behavior to an evil disposition, we must examine the situations that led them down that path. Chapter 2: The Fluidity of Human Personality. Another critical concept explored in the Lucifer effect is the fluid nature of human personality. Many people believe that personality traits are fixed and unchanging. However, Zimbardo demonstrates that our behavior and moral choices are heavily influenced by the situations we find ourselves in. Consider how differently you might act in various contexts. For example, you likely behave one way with close friends and another way in a professional setting. These variations in behavior highlight the fact that our personalities are not static. They are dynamic and responsive to our environment. This situational approach to understanding human behavior is central to the field of social psychology. It suggests that who we are and how we act is not solely determined by internal traits, but is also shaped by external factors such as social norms, authority figures, and the specific circumstances we encounter. One of the most famous experiments that illustrate this concept is Stanley Milgram's obedience study, conducted in the 1960s. In this experiment, participants were instructed to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to a learner, who was actually an actor, whenever the learner made a mistake on a memory test. Despite the apparent pain and distress of the learner, a significant majority of participants continued to administer the shocks when prompted by an authority figure, even when the shocks reached potentially lethal levels. This experiment revealed that ordinary people could be compelled to commit acts of cruelty simply because they were following orders from an authority figure. It also showed how our sense of personal responsibility can be overridden by the demands of a situation. The Milgram experiment is a powerful reminder that under certain conditions, anyone is capable of evil. Chapter 3. The Stanford Prison Experiment, A Descent into Darkness. Zimbardo's own Stanford Prison Experiment is perhaps the most famous study demonstrating the impact of situational factors on human behavior. Conducted in 1971, the experiment involved 24 male college students who were randomly assigned to play the roles of guards or prisoners in a simulated prison environment. The experiment was intended to last 2 weeks, but had to be terminated after just 6 days due to the extreme and abusive behavior exhibited by the participants. The guards, who were given uniforms, batons, and mirrored sunglasses to create a sense of authority and anonymity, quickly began to display sadistic and abusive behavior toward the prisoners. The prisoners, on the other hand, became increasingly submissive, with some even experiencing severe emotional distress. The experiment spiraled out of control as the guards' behavior became more brutal and the prisoners more dehumanized. What's particularly disturbing about the Stanford Prison Experiment is that the participants were all psychologically healthy individuals with no prior history of violence. The transformation from ordinary college students to cruel enforcers of a prison regime happened rapidly and was driven entirely by the situational dynamics of the simulated prison environment. The Stanford Prison Experiment underscores the idea that situational factors, such as the assignment of roles, authority structures, and de-individuation, the loss of self-awareness and accountability in a group setting, can lead ordinary people to commit extraordinary acts of evil. It challenges the notion that evil is an inherent trait and instead suggests that it is something that can emerge in anyone given the right conditions. Chapter 4. Obedience to Authority, the Gateway to Evil. One of the key factors that can lead people to commit evil acts is obedience to authority. Throughout history, we have seen countless examples of atrocities committed by individuals who were just following orders. The power of authority figures to compel people to act against their moral principles is a central theme in social psychology and is vividly illustrated in both the Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison Experiment. In the Milgram experiment, the presence of an authority figure in a lab coat was enough to convince participants to administer potentially lethal electric shocks to another person. The authority figure's calm demeanor and insistence that the experiment must continue led participants to suppress their own moral judgments and comply with the instructions they were given. Similarly, in the Stanford Prison Experiment, the guards were given authority over the prisoners and quickly began to abuse that power. The mere fact that they were in a position of authority seemed to justify their actions in their minds, even as those actions became increasingly cruel. The Jonestown Massacre is another tragic example of the dangers of obedience to authority. Jim Jones, the charismatic leader of the People's Temple, gradually transformed from a compassionate advocate for social justice into a tyrannical leader who demanded absolute loyalty from his followers. When the utopia he had created in the jungles of Guyana began to crumble, Jones ordered his followers to commit mass suicide by drinking poison. Over 900 people, including children, obeyed his command. These examples highlight the dangerous potential of authority figures to influence people's behavior, even to the point of committing atrocities. They also remind us that it is essential to critically evaluate the directives of those in power and to resist when those directives conflict with our moral principles. Chapter 5. The Erosion of Personal Responsibility. Another significant factor that can lead to evil behavior is the erosion of personal responsibility. When individuals feel that they are not personally accountable for their actions, they are more likely to engage in harmful behavior. This phenomenon is known as de-individuation, where a person becomes anonymous and loses their sense of self in a group setting. The Milgram experiment demonstrated this concept clearly. Participants were told that they would not be held responsible for any harm caused by the electric shocks they administered. The responsibility would fall on the experimenter. This lack of personal accountability made it easier for participants to continue delivering shocks, even as the learner's apparent suffering increased. De-individuation can also occur when individuals are physically anonymous or part of a large group. For example, in the Stanford Prison Experiment, the guards wore mirrored sunglasses that obscured their eyes and made them feel anonymous. This anonymity contributed to their willingness to engage in cruel and abusive behavior. A field experiment conducted by Zimbardo further illustrates the impact of de-individuation. He placed an abandoned car in a rundown area of the Bronx, New York, and observed as vandals quickly descended upon it, stripping it of valuable parts and eventually destroying it. In contrast, a similar car placed in a well-kept neighborhood in Palo Alto, California, remained untouched. The difference in behavior can be attributed to the level of anonymity and social accountability in each setting. In the Bronx, the vandals felt anonymous and unaccountable, leading to destructive behavior, while in Palo Alto, the presence of a close-knit community discouraged such actions. De-individuation and the erosion of personal responsibility are critical factors in understanding how ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts of evil. When individuals feel that they are not personally accountable for their actions, they are more likely to engage in behavior that they would otherwise consider immoral. Chapter 6. Dehumanization, turning people into objects. One of the most insidious ways that individuals justify cruel behavior is through the process of dehumanization. Dehumanization involves perceiving others as less than human, stripping them of their individuality and dignity. This psychological process allows people to commit acts of violence and cruelty without the moral burden that would typically accompany such actions. Dehumanization has been a key factor in some of the most horrific events in history, including genocide, slavery, and war crimes. When a group of people is dehumanized, they are no longer seen as individuals with thoughts, feelings, and rights. Instead, they are reduced to objects, animals, or even pests that need to be eliminated. In a study conducted by psychologist Albert Bandura, participants were asked to supervise and punish a group of students based on their performance on a task. Before the experiment began, the participants overheard the experimenters describe one group of students as an animalistic, rotten bunch and another group as perceptive and understanding. The participants who supervised the animalistic group administered harsher punishments than those who supervised the more humanized group. This experiment demonstrates how easily dehumanization can influence behavior. When people are labeled as less than human, it becomes easier to justify treating them cruelly. This psychological mechanism has been used throughout history to justify atrocities such as the Holocaust, where Jews were dehumanized as vermin or rats, and the Rwandan genocide, where Tutsis were referred to as cockroaches. Dehumanization is a powerful tool that can lead to the normalization of evil behavior. It allows individuals and groups to commit acts of cruelty without the moral constraints that would typically prevent such actions. By recognizing and challenging dehumanizing language and attitudes, we can help prevent the escalation of violence and cruelty. Chapter 7. The role of ideology and euphemistic language. Evil actions are often justified through the use of ideology and euphemistic language. Ideology provides a framework that makes harmful behavior seem necessary or even noble, while euphemistic language softens the reality of the actions being taken. In social psychology experiments, participants are often given a cover story that justifies their actions, even if those actions are cruel or harmful. For example, in the Milgram experiment, participants were told that they were helping to improve memory by administering electric shocks. This cover story allowed participants to justify their actions, even as they caused apparent harm to another person. In the real world, ideology plays a similar role. Ideologies provide a belief system that can justify actions that would otherwise be considered immoral. For example, during the Holocaust, the Nazi ideology framed the extermination of Jews as a necessary step to purify the Aryan race. This ideology allowed ordinary people to participate in or turn a blind eye to genocide. Euphemistic language also plays a significant role in justifying evil actions. By using language that minimizes the severity of actions, individuals and institutions can make harmful behavior seem more acceptable. For example, during the War on Terror, the U.S. government used terms like enhanced interrogation techniques to describe what was essentially torture. This euphemistic language helped to justify the use of torture and shield those responsible from moral and legal accountability. The use of ideology and euphemistic language is a powerful tool in the perpetration of evil. It allows individuals and groups to rationalize their actions and avoid the moral and ethical implications of their behavior. By critically examining the language and ideologies that are used to justify harmful actions, we can begin to challenge and resist the forces of evil. Chapter 8. Resisting Evil and Embracing Heroism. While the Lucifer Effect provides a sobering exploration of the factors that lead to evil behavior, it also offers hope. Zimbardo emphasizes that we all have the potential to resist evil and act heroically, even in the face of immense pressure. Resisting evil begins with taking personal responsibility for our actions. It's essential to recognize that regardless of the circumstances, we are ultimately responsible for the choices we make. This means rejecting the temptation to de-individuate or shift responsibility onto others, as was seen in the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment. Another critical aspect of resisting evil is the willingness to defy unjust authority. In both the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment, some participants chose to resist the instructions of authority figures and refused to engage in harmful behavior. These individuals demonstrated moral courage by standing up for their principles, even when it was difficult or dangerous to do so. Questioning the ideologies and cover stories that justify harmful actions is also essential in resisting evil. By critically examining the beliefs and narratives that are used to rationalize cruelty, we can challenge the forces that seek to normalize evil behavior. This requires a willingness to think independently and to question the status quo, even when it is unpopular or risky. Finally, Zimbardo highlights the importance of heroism as a counterbalance to evil. Heroes are individuals who take action in the face of injustice, often at great personal risk. They put the needs of others before their own and are willing to make sacrifices to protect and defend those who are vulnerable. One example of heroism is the story of Wesley Autry, known as the subway hero in New York City. When he saw a man having a seizure and falling onto the subway tracks, Autry jumped onto the tracks and placed the man between the rails, saving his life. Autry's actions were heroic not because he was extraordinary, but because he chose to act while others stood by. Conclusion: the thin line between good and evil. The Lucifer Effect challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the capacity for evil exists within all of us. Our behavior is not solely determined by our character or personality, but is heavily influenced by the situations we encounter. Under the right conditions, ordinary people can commit acts of cruelty and violence that they would never have thought possible. However, Zimbardo also reminds us that we have the power to resist evil and choose heroism. By taking personal responsibility for our actions, defying unjust authority, questioning harmful ideologies, and embracing the potential for heroism, we can navigate the thin line between good and evil. In doing so, we can work to create a more just and compassionate world, where the forces of evil are challenged and the potential for good is realized.